So Eric, what's your AI journey?
It goes way, way back. I see Todd Liftborough over here. In 1986, before most of you guys were born, Todd and I started a course on building expert systems, if you know what that is, and creating AI. And so we started a company. We call it Foundation Technologies in homage to Isaac Asimov to help companies use AI. They sort of hit this AI winter a little bit after that, and that slowed things down a little bit. But I continued to be interested in it. And then when GPT-3 came out in 2020, I remember using it to help write my discussant comments at an NBR workshop. We had an NBR workshop on AI and the economy, and I thought it would be appropriate to use GPT-3 to help me with some of the comments. I first had to do it straight, and it was like pretty good, and then I had to do it in the style of Taylor Swift, and that was sort of my aha moment when it was like these amazing poems about this economic paper, and I was like, okay, that's just too cool.
Great, all right.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I was born and raised in the former USSR, so someone who's been a science fiction fan my entire life. It was very, very big when I was growing up. But really, it was also when GPT-3 came out. And I remember back then it was a playground and, you know, just a very straightforward interface. And I was coming out of 8 years in government. By no means a technologist, but even at that moment, I thought, this is incredible. Like, it is coherent, it answers my questions. And 6 months later, when I started using embeddings, I thought, you know, when I went to the White House, I would get a folder that my CIA briefer would bring to me every single day with all of the intelligence that that person thought I needed to read. And it was, let's say, 20 articles out of probably 20,000 that the intelligence community produces that day. And I thought, oh my God, if we had this, I could just search on any topic, and I could get the most advanced briefing on any issue I could possibly imagine. I mean, I just thought it was absolutely going to be transformative. And it really surprised me that it was not actually a sentiment more broadly at that time.
Yeah, and you served in the White House for 8 years, so you know, do the math, how that tool could have been helpful. So let me throw a question to you, Anna. You lead global impact at OpenAI, a company all of us know about, and it's you know, an exciting company at this moment and playing a big role. A company that has said its mission is to benefit for all humanity. What does that work look like?
So this, you know, OpenAI's mission is to ensure that AI benefits all of humanity, which is, you know, an incredibly ambitious approach. And already, you know, there's a free tool that's hundreds of millions of people use around the world. And actually, you know, Brazil, which is the #3 market, I believe, for OpenAI, overwhelmingly it is free users. And when I was there last year, in some of the favelas, it was really astonishing to see people who were not even literate, but able to use it for their business. And just, I do think that that adds a great deal of value. But then, as we all know, there is a third of humanity that doesn't have internet connectivity at all. What does it mean to ensure that this tool benefits them? A lot of the languages that they speak are not online, and so don't make it into training data. So one of the areas I've really been focusing on is what do you do about low resource languages? How do you ensure that people still are able to have access and have the model speak their language? The second piece is, you know, how do you reach people that are not otherwise engaging with the tool directly? So, you know, I try to find programs like one we have with UNICEF that builds digital accessible textbooks all over the world in many places where there is low connectivity or, you know, low penetration of digital devices. And they are able to create, you know, textbooks at 10 times the speed and reduce the cost by 10x. So basically working with organizations that are serving these communities, how do you empower them and enable them to really serve the people that they work with?
So I've known Eric for years, and I spend a lot of quality time with him, but I actually am with others who are referencing his research all the time. And we talk about his research when he's not in the room, positive things. Eric, I know, some of what Reed just said is referencing work that you've done. Tell us, Canaries in the Coal Mine, 6 Facts About Labor. You just published that, like, how many hours ago?
That was about a little over a week ago. Well, first let me connect to the thing that Anna was saying and about the free use of GPT, and Reed mentioned this too, that a lot of the benefits from AI are not being measured anywhere in the economic statistics. There's this concept of consumer surplus, how much value people are getting versus how much they actually have to pay. And when you're paying zero, that consumer surplus can be a pretty big number. And we just had an article in the Wall Street Journal describing about $100 billion from what OpenAI is creating. So there's a lot of value, and we're going to have to rethink our economic statistics to account for all these digital goods that are creating a lot of free goods. The canaries in the coal mine is maybe the other side of that. I mean, I'm amazed at how rapidly technology is progressing, creating enormous amounts of value, growing productivity. But the other side of it, there's a lot of disruption. And we've been seeing so many news stories, one side or the other about, this is overhyped or underhyped, or there's, a crisis or not. And we didn't know what the answer was, so we wanted to see what the data said, and we teamed up with ADP, the world's largest payroll processor, and we got this incredibly detailed data, better than anything that the government or anyone else is able to share with us. And what we found was that if you broke it down into different groups, overall coding jobs continued to grow, call center jobs continued to grow, but there are subgroups that were really being hit hard, specifically the people in the age 22 to 25, the early career folks, had a noticeable drop in employment. Too bad I don't have a whiteboard or something here. I'm a professor. I'm tempted to go up and start drawing. But what you can see is that there was this break starting around like 2023 where there was really a difference in early career people in the most exposed jobs to AI. Now, this was not a causal experiment. We didn't take a bunch of people or firms and give them access, and the other group didn't. So we don't know for sure the causality, but there's an emerging pattern there where a lot of job categories are changing course and falling a lot. And then speaking of a couple of hours ago, there was this report that just came out. Some of you may have seen it if you were checking your news. 911,000 fewer jobs created in the past year or so than we had previously thought. They did a huge, huge revision to the jobs numbers. It was really uncharacteristically changed. Despite firing the BLS commissioner, there's still changes, revisions in the job numbers. And we don't know for sure what's behind that. I'm sure there's macroeconomic effects, recession, and other things that may be emerging. But part of it is consistent with this idea that there's a more of a fundamental change in the economy than the models had been predicting. I'll leave you on one kind of slightly potentially positive note. I mean, I did the math as I was standing over there in the back thinking about this. If there's that big a drop in the jobs, then productivity is defined as GDP divided by hours worked. It's output over input. So if you have fewer hours worked and the same GDP, guess what? Mathematically, that means that productivity is significantly higher. And so we were wondering if this productivity gain from AI was going to start happening. By my math, it's an extra like 0.5% of productivity growth, which is not trivial in that period of time. And so that would be the silver lining, that we may have a lot more productivity in the coming years.
Yeah, and like, what is a job when you're co-working with technology? Does the even definition of a job change? And even the kind of work that we're going to be doing, there's work we can do now that we never could do. So you economists may have to rethink your whole universe. And some of you may have a hard time on it, and some of you may be the leaders that help redefine our understanding.
Well, Reed was spot on when he was talking about using AI as a tool, or James Landay before that, Doug Engelbart's work going back a few decades about using AI to augment people. And I'll just mention one more thing from that Canaries paper. Another silver lining was that we found that people who are using AI to augment their work rather than to automate it tended to have growing employment. So there were these subgroups that were doing quite well.
Yep. So let me ask you a follow-up question on the first one I just asked. The productivity paradox. Historically, general-purpose technologies take decades to show up in the productivity data. Are we at risk of another one of those with AI, or is this time fundamentally different from where you sit?
It's in between. I do think that I'm blown away by the technology. We were just talking about some of our personal stories about what the capabilities are. At the same time, if you talk to a lot of business executives, there's a lot of disappointment and even growing anger that the benefits aren't turning into business value. But as you just mentioned, that's actually a very common pattern with general purpose technologies. The steam engine, electricity. You have these eye-popping capabilities, but getting them to actually turn into business value often takes much longer. In the case of electricity, like decades. I don't think we have to wait decades for AI. I think the math I just did show that we may be beginning to see glimmers of that happening. But the real bottleneck is not so much more amazing capabilities. Thank you to all the engineers in here who are doing that. But I think the bottleneck is on the business side and figuring out how to translate that into something actionable that can be done. One of the reasons I started a company called WorkHelix was to kind of close that gap and make it easier for people to find that. I think we may be seeing significant productivity gains I was going to say in the second half of the decade. It may be as of this morning that we're already beginning to see some of that, and I'm optimistic that the Congressional Budget Office and others have way underestimated how much productivity we're going to see over the next 3 or 4 years. And that would obviously raise living standards a lot, but also create a lot of disruption. And so we have to be prepared for that.
Yep.
Can I actually build on something that you just said? Because I do think, for example, I was just remembering a study that showed that some physicians working with AI actually saw either no improvement in diagnostic accuracy or a slight drop. And when you actually dig into the study, what you see is that a lot of them had no idea how to engage with the tool.
Yeah.
So they were just given the tool, they weren't told anything about how would you use it or how do you integrate it into this workflow. And actually working with, even for me, who's been at OpenAI for 4 years, working with this tool really changes the way that I work. And to actually be able to make it useful for me, I had this is actually a relatively challenging transition.
Right.
And we just also ourselves had the very first study of LLM as a clinical co-pilot in patient interactions. And so these were 40,000 patient interactions in Kenya, where the tool actually ran in the background and only surfaced concerns when it felt that there was an error being made. And the doctor then, or the medical professional then had the opportunity to engage with that, review it, and then make a determination whether they were going to revise their opinion or not. And in this study, we found that there was a 18% increase in accuracy of diagnosis, and actually 100% of the physicians felt that it improved their experience, and many of them actually felt it was also a learning tool because a lot of time was invested in actually figuring out how the relationship was going to work between the medical professional and the tool. So I do think a lot of that, even at enterprises, at any large-scale sort of entity that's trying to integrate it, it is figuring out what is that workflow going to look like to actually get those gains.
So Anna, I'd love for you to use your imagination and maybe inform us on some things that we all can go in our respective lives and amplify. What is the greatest promise for AI to be broadly beneficial, and what barriers do you see to that? Because I think we all can be ambassadors for that expansive vision. But before I ask you to share your imagination on that, I think people would like to understand OpenAI a little better. You've been there 4 years. It's like dog years, 28 years. OpenAI has shifted from a nonprofit research lab to a capped profit juggernaut. How do you explain that evolution to those who worry that commercial imperatives are overwhelming safety and ethics? And this is not a gotcha question. It's just you guys are evolving. The space is evolving. I think your role now, this is not what you're dealing with, but you've had to answer that question before. Just curious on how you explain it.
Sure. So the transition to a capped profit entity actually happened before I joined. But the idea behind it was, when OpenAI first started, they were a bunch of direction. What AGI meant or what research direction to pursue in order to achieve it was not at all clear. There were a lot of teams. There was a team that was building a robotic arm that could solve the Rubik's Cube. There was a lot of investment in gaming. OpenAI had a team that was trying to beat Dota, which is this multiplayer video game. And language models were not actually, there wasn't a massive investment in them. And at the time, there were even papers from some of the most recognizable names in the field saying that is kind of a dead end. Neural networks were just not going to be advancing in a meaningful way. And so when OpenAI decided to make a bet on large language models and specifically scaling them, which means investing more, using more data, more parameters, more compute to train them, they realized that at their current level of funding, they were just not going to be able to build the compute infrastructure necessary to run this experiment. The experiment resulted in, the absolute, revolution in this field that you see today. And that's when they switched to this model. But I would say, I don't know that there's anything I can say to make everyone feel totally comfortable. But I do think that the thing that gives me the most, I would say, optimism is that there's a business imperative for these things to be safe. People, enterprises don't want to purchase products that they don't believe are going to be safe for their ultimate consumers. Governments don't want to integrate something that is going to, be unsafe for their populations. There's a massive business imperative, so that I don't think you have to rely on any company's, ethics or morals.
Okay, imagination.
I already touched on that a bit, because I do think if there is one field where I feel like it's just going to be incredibly transformatively positive, it's healthcare. And access to the kind of data, even for me, I use it all the time, even though I have access to the most incredible healthcare that, anyone can have in the United States. I still, it's very confusing to navigate the system. And we are, the tools are useful in such a variety of ways. One of the projects I have is with an organization called 10-bed ICU in India, where, of course, people have to treat huge numbers of patients in a short amount of time in a lot of different dialects. The model in the background, takes this information and just turns it into structured data that can be put into the medical record for follow-up, so that the time that the nurses spend with the patients can be focused on actual engagement, and they don't have to spend hours and hours on detailed note-taking. And the models are actually getting quite accurate at this. As I mentioned, we just had a small pilot in Gambia working with neurosurgeons. And neurosurgery is this intervention that gives people often back up to 21 years of productive life, but an intervention that's unavailable to billions of people. And so we wanted to see that if in this specialized setting, the models could actually provide meaningful decision support and help. Some of these nurses are triaging 100 patients in a night. And on the very first night, the model identified that someone who has not gotten antibiotics needed to get them. Obviously, it works best when it is a medical professional that is managing this interaction, but I just think that we can scale these things further, and I believe give access to healthcare, really high quality healthcare, in lots of places where that was not previously available, or improve healthcare even in places where it is broadly available.
Great. So John McCarthy was mentioned. He came west to found the AI lab here. Minsky was a neighbor of mine, and I remember asking him, where'd the word AI come from? And he said, well, in 1955, I wrote a grant to the government, and I wanted to scare them, and I thought AI sounded scary, and they funded me to take some people up to Dartmouth.
Still working.
Yeah, he said if I had said, he said to me, I could have called it BI. It could have been anything. And I think AI comes from, cybernetics, or, the concepts have been around.
Yeah.
It was just a term. You write a lot about augmentation versus automation. AI, artificial intelligence, artificial is like the word, but in terms of the next chapter of how this technology plays a role in society, is it augmentation or is it automation?
Well, I hope it's augmentation. I think there is too much of a focus on automation. A lot of people, including me, we instinctively look at some task that's being done and think, oh, how can we use a machine to automate that? And that's in a way, a little bit of a lazy but natural thing to do when you're trying to make things better. A harder but more productive thing is, what new thing can we do that's never been done before? Obviously, that requires a lot more creativity. Alan Turing was the person who came up with this idea of the Turing test that you guys all know, which is can we make a machine that perfectly imitates a human so tightly that we can't tell which is the human, which is like read AI. And that for a lot of people, that was sort of the iconic vision. When I was like 12 years old, I was like, oh, that's so cool. We should try to do that, make machines that are just as good as humans. But now I think it's actually exactly the wrong direction. To your point, that if we make machines that just imitate humans, well, there's two issues. First off, with all due respect to my fellow humans here, that's too low a ceiling. We should be doing better that. I mean, imagine how lame it would have been if Henry Ford had said, we're going to make a car that walks as fast as a human. It's got two feet and runs really fast. You know, that would have been like, come on, you can do better than that. And likewise, machines can do so much more. There's so many capabilities that we should be aiming for. But the second reason is more subtle, but perhaps more frightening, which is that if you make a machine that perfectly imitates humans, from an economist's perspective, that means it's a substitute for humans instead of a complement, instead of augmenting. Well, what do substitutes do? They drive down the price of the competition. So that tends to lead to lower wages, more concentration of wealth and power in whoever controls the machinery, maybe some capped nonprofit or some other entity. That, for most of us, that's not the world we want, where humans don't have much of a role, and the machines are able to make all the scientific discoveries and do all the important things. On the other hand, there is a path that Doug Engelbart and others described, which is using machines to augment us, allow us to do new things. And that keeps humans not just in the loop, but ideally humans in charge, and allows us to be part of that journey of creating new things. Either of those is technologically possible, and by the way, both of them can be profitable and beneficial in different situations. There are certainly lots of unpleasant tasks we'd love to have automated away, but I'd like to see more of an effort thinking about how we can do new things, how we can help cure more diseases, new scientific discoveries, new products and services that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And I've been talking at different AI conferences about this, and a lot of engineers are coming up to you, oh yeah, I wish someone had told us that before. We can certainly do that. We can design things that way. I wrote a paper called The Turing Trap, basically encouraging people to be worried about just making imitative AI and think more about the augmentative AI.
Great. So my last question to you is, I'm going to tell you now so you can think about it. What do you know about OpenAI that we don't, that would be interesting to know? But you can think about that. Right. To both of you, 3 questions. What keeps you up at night regarding AI? Who and what inspires you about AI? And define success by 2035 for AI. So they haven't been told these, so we'll see how they do on the fly. They may not do well. I don't know. Okay. What keeps you up at night?
The fact that I have significant concerns that authoritarian governments are going to leverage this technology to rapidly scale repressive policies.
I mean, the way you presented that, very emotional. I mean,
I'm from Russia. I have many friends who are, in jail or unable to return, and I have in my mind constructed many versions that the Russian government could use to further scale the current level of repression. And we know these tools are already being built. Obviously, it is one of the reasons I hope the United States and democracies stay in the lead. But I don't know that that's going to be enough to prevent that.
Yeah. Who and what inspires you when it comes to AI?
Oh, when it comes to AI, I think, and this is sort of what people don't necessarily know about OpenAI, but because of the way that OpenAI was founded, there are still a significant number of people inside of this company who spend all of their time extremely focused on the societal impacts and what specifically we can do with our models or ourselves. What are the things that we can be doing to actually make sure that this mission is real, that it benefits humanity in a way that I actually do think it's a feature of AI labs in a way that it has not been a feature of other types of companies, in a way that I do think people should find encouraging.
Right. This is like Family Feud. We'll hear from him in a minute at the end. All right. Define success by 2030. I have a DeLorean. I've been there. I know what it's like. We'll see what you say.
Well, for the work I'm doing by 2035, I want as many people as possible to be actually benefiting from this technology rather than seeing the benefits concentrated in a small group.
Yeah, no, there was a moment where Web 2.0, everyone was saying that last billion to get online, but now I think people are realizing, it's AI, but AI is multi-dimensional in what it can unlock. It's not just, getting lines to people. All right, You're up. Let the daily double, or no, whatever. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah.
Who and what inspires you? And defining success by 2035.
Well, for better or worse, I share Anna's concerns about the AI being used to concentrate wealth and power. I have a paper coming out with Zoe Hitzig in a few weeks where we basically talk about how AI, incredibly powerful intelligence, it may reverse or undermine some of what Friedrich Hayek wrote about, he wrote this classic paper called The Use of Knowledge in Society, that the important knowledge is widely dispersed in society. That leads to power being widely dispersed in society. And he said there's no way all of, one entity could have all that information and knowledge in one place. And he was certainly right for most of the past, 70 plus years. But it's increasingly possible that, big data centers, whether they're in Bentonville or wherever, can get very detailed information about all consumer preferences, your supply chain, et cetera, aggregate that, and make organized, coordinated decisions. And that might be very efficient, but it also leads to this concentration of power. And I think most of us would prefer a world where power was widely distributed. So we need to think hard, not just about maximizing efficiency, but how we can maximize, freedom or maintain freedom. And I see some disturbing trends on the technological side that we need to think harder about how do we maintain widely distributed power, both economically and ultimately politically.
For time, I also want to get to hear what it's been like 4 years at OpenAI. So yeah, do the other two questions.
What was the second one?
Who and what inspires you for 50 points?
Well, I'm very inspired. When I talk to a lot of the leaders in the field, I do think there's a kind of a optimism and a interest in doing what's great for the world. The way OpenAI was founded. I think there's often some forces pushing people in the other direction. And I hope we can kind of have this abundance mentality of how we can do things that are great for the world and not just have it kind of captured for a small group. And those battles are going on in the heads of a lot of people, and I hope that that better angels win.
Great. All right. What do you know that others don't know about working at OpenAI? Because you work there.
Well, I kind of said that piece, but I mean, it's like working at OpenAI has been like working at 30 different companies in 4 years, because when I started, it was a small research lab with no intention of being a first-party product provider, and I think a lot of us still aren't sure how that happened, but so I don't know. It's maybe the first case of a company becoming a massive consumer company by accident.
Yep.